A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Let's dive into the world of what is known as ultra-fast fashion. We might be talking about what is known as hyper-speed production cycles, where new styles are designed, manufactured and listed online even within days or even hours. It's complex and its impacts are on a lot of people across the planet. Well, our next guest has a podcast dealing with the ethics of ultra-fast fashion. You might want to know some Christian thinking on this topic in this fashion space. Halliday is the advocacy coordinator for Baptist World Aid. She's the host of a new podcast. The podcast is called Behind the Barcode, The Truth Behind Ultra-Fast Fashion. Kat, a special welcome along to 2020.
Thanks, Neil. It's great to be here.
Let's talk about those who might not be so familiar here. What exactly is ultra-fast fashion, Kat?
Well, you gave us a great introduction to a few of those features or pointers that we might look for when we talk about ultra-fast fashion. Really, as it says on the tin, it has taken the business model, good and bad, of fast fashion and put it into overdrive. So fast fashion would have their eye on the catwalk and turn it around to consumers in a matter of weeks or months. But ultra-fast fashion has their eye on our social media feeds, and they're turning those styles around to us in, as you said, a matter of days. And this model is incredibly dynamic. It's very fast moving and, as I said, really closely linked to social media. They are able to get things into our online stores while they're still relevant and suiting that micro trend, the 5 minutes of fame.
Hey, I know you don't mind mentioning brands. Every time I talk to Baptist World Aid brands, that's no problem at all. Brands like Shein and Temu, are they the sort of focus here, renowned for being able to get thousands of items up and available daily?
Those are the two key players that we would clearly define as ultra-fast. There's a few others like maybe Boohoo or Cider that might fit in that category as well. And that's in comparison to brands like Zara or H&M, which would be those typical fast fashion models.
Okay, we're talking fast fashion, but we're also talking here ultra-low prices, aren't we? And that might be the attraction to buy these sorts of garments online.
That's right. Where we used to be able to spend $100 on one or two pieces of clothing, now we can dump these huge boxes of plastic wrapped clothing onto our beds. We've seen, influencers take off with their Shein and Temu hauls where they're doing that. These prices are so low, but we need to remember that it's thought that 100 pairs of hands have touched our clothing before it's reached our wardrobe. So it's a very human story of our clothes, and that's no different for ultra-fast fashion. So when you're looking at that price tag and dividing it by 100, that doesn't leave a lot to go around.
Now, there's a lot of depth in the things that we're talking about today because you have got a lot of research on your side. Baptist World Aid been part of the ethical fashion report that gets released each year. And you're talking about making the fashion industry more ethical, and a special honour to you because you're in a rubber hits the road situation and you're dealing with people who are being exploited in sweatshops around the world. But as a Christian believer, how do we think about this, making the fashion industry more ethical? How do we go about a start?
It's a great question to be asking, and I think what the fashion industry has done in the last few decades is make those people that are making our clothes so far away from us. These supply chains are so opaque that even if I wanted to know the conditions, it's really hard for me as a consumer to understand what's going on in the supply chain. And that's exactly why we do this work, to empower consumers with that knowledge of what's going on behind the scenes and to hold companies to account so that they are making progress year on year for people and planet. But I know that these people that feel hidden in the supply chain, for me, they're certainly not unnoticed by God. And so the conversation here is about, well, how can I love my neighbor if they're next door to me or if they're on the other side of the world? I'm connected to them, I have an impact on them, and in small ways I can decide what that impact actually is.
And this is why it affects us, I imagine, because here we are in Australia and we can say, well, I'm removed from that space. I don't know what goes on in the sweatshops of Southeast Asia and China and Bangladesh. What does that matter to me? But we're the consumers, we're the buyers, and there must be some responsibility on us here. How do you relate Aussies to the sweatshops of, say, Southeast Asia?
It's a tricky balance because on one hand, we're keeping these brands in business with our dollars. When we choose to spend with them, in some ways we're voting for their practices and saying, I'll stand by how you made these clothes and I'll purchase them and bring them into my wardrobe. But on the other hand, I didn't make those decisions to hire people in unethical ways or set up unsafe working conditions for them. And I think when these brands are spending millions and millions and their best marketing minds are behind getting these products to us, is it really only the fault of my willpower that I'm over consuming with them, or that maybe they're not performing so well? So I do think that every stakeholder needs to come to the table. Consumers have our sphere of influence in what we buy. Brands have their influence in how these things are made. And really importantly, the government has levers that only they can pull that will level the playing field for all companies that we can shop with.
Now, Kat, we don't even know which of these brands are often involved in, with sweatshops and paying low wages in poor conditions, no safety, no contracts for workers. Of course, we've got some compassion for them, but when we're at the shops or when we're buying online, how do we actually make sense of this? I imagine this is where you come in, because you are monitoring the brands, and so special honour to you for doing that. But for the ordinary listener to our conversation today, who's often driven by price, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes.
That's right. Well, we have tried to change that here at Baptist World Aid by creating the Ethical Fashion Guide. Every year or every second year, we assess how they're treating workers and the environment in the supply chain, spend a lot of time going back and forth surveying these companies, and it generates a score out of 100. Our last report that we released had over 450 brands included, and these are the brands that Australians love to shop with. And what I will say is that the price tag isn't a perfect match for how ethical they might be behind the scenes. The score and the price doesn't always match. So do check out that Ethical Fashion Guide and you might be surprised who does okay, and actually behind the scenes which companies aren't putting in the work.
So you are ranking the brands and you're communicating to them when they're falling short or they're ranking very low. There are going to be some brands that rank high, and they're the ones that you'd like us to shop with. And those that are ranking low, you'd like us to say, let's think twice before we spend some money with that outfit. Is that the way it works?
Yeah, we communicate both a rank and also the score out of 100. So to give you an idea, in our 2024 Ethical Fashion Guide, the average score was just 31 out of 100. So you could shop at an above average brand, but they might be still performing pretty poorly overall in the assessment. And that's a comment on how far our whole industry has to go. So we would certainly encourage people to shop with those brands that are performing in the higher category. Their scores are in a little blue dot on our guide. But more than that, maybe we can reflect and think about whether we need to be consuming so much new clothing. If we can learn to love what we have, or contribute to the secondhand sort of circular fashion space, go to an op shop or participate in a clothing swap.
When I'm thinking of the things you're saying there, and what does that mean for the Christian believer? Seeking first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, so that all of these other things that we might crave, that we might desire, that we might want, get put into a really good place of context contextualising those things against what's really important, the kingdom of God. When you're a Christian believer, I imagine, Kat, you'd like Christians to be leaders when it comes to how they're choosing their fashion. What's your message for Christian believers around what their wardrobe might look like today and how it should look tomorrow?
That's such a great question. I think the two things that would come to mind for me would be, firstly, just an invitation to reflect, maybe think about that contentment piece. Australians purchase 55 new pieces of clothing every year, and I'm not sure that we need more than one new piece of clothing every week. So maybe we can just stop and ask ourselves, do I need to be keeping up with the Joneses in this way? Or can I love what I have and take good care of the clothes that I have? And then if I am looking to acquire something or add something to my wardrobe, what story do I want my clothes to tell? When the default story isn't great, when the default story is one of exploitation and pollution, maybe we can opt for a brand that is performing more ethically, or opt for secondhand clothing where we're keeping that in circulation for longer. And I think that's a great way to live out our values in this small daily crossroads that we find ourselves in.
And there's no one with a big stick, is there, that is punishing the offenders. All you can do is apply some quiet pressure, and you can encourage consumers of these sorts of clothing lines to think twice before they spend their dollars. If you get enough people following you, it makes a huge difference to their bottom line, and then that forces some change. Is that the ultimate aspiration? You want to see change in the whole industry? And I know it's a process, but you want to see that change come.
Absolutely. What I'm encouraging people to do is consider how they can support the choices that they're making in their wardrobe with their voice as well. So alongside seeking to build an ethical wardrobe, actually, how can we raise our voice to advocate for change with the brands directly or with our MPs to put some legislation across the line to level the playing field? So alongside the podcast that we made, Behind the Barcode, we have released a Speak Out to Your MP tool where you can pop in your postcode, you get a pre-written email, and it sends straight to your MP saying we need to raise the bar that the whole industry can perform to. And so that means some better environmental regulation in place and some stronger forced labour regulation in place. Please, can you support this? And that would represent my views as a member of your electorate. So that takes 30 seconds, and that's a great way to just take that step further with your ethical consumerism.
You can do something. I guess the first thing you could start with would be to stand in front of your wardrobe and do a little evaluation. And if you had your ethical fashion report in hand, you'd be able to look at some of the labels on your clothes and see whether those labels rate high or low on your spectrum of making a judgment as to how good they are ethically as a fashion supplier. But I'll encourage listeners, you can access the latest ethical fashion report at baptistworldaid.org.au. You might want to connect with Kat, especially on her new podcast. It's called Behind the Barcode, The Truth Behind Ultra-Fast Fashion. There's a lot of people who are interested in fashion, particularly young women, and I might even say young men are often interested in that space too. Behind the Barcode, The Truth Behind Ultra-Fast Fashion. You can find that podcast wherever you find podcasts, and you can connect with Kat. Kat Halliday is the Advocacy Coordinator for Baptist World Aid, baptistworldaid.org.au. Hey Kat, thanks so much for sharing your insights with us today on 2020.
It's been wonderful. Thanks, Neil.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.